It's my pleasure to introduce a foot soldier in social justice, a shoulder we all stand on, a pioneer. He's the chair of the retiree committee. He's at Labor Day parade. He's at ratification votes. He's a workers' advocate. He's a human rights advocate. He has the history, and he was our former membership secretary. This man is like city TV. He's everywhere. And he's retired. Please welcome Brother Ken Amoroso.
During the past month, we recognized the achievements of prominent blacks in Canada. We should also recognize the memorable events that form a milestone of black history. One such event took place on the 11th of February, 1969. The day, it is said, Canada lost its innocence. At 11 o'clock that night, on all the television stations, Canadians heard that there was the biggest student riot in Canada's history. Black students rampaged and rioted and caused millions of dollars in damages, damaging computers at Sir George Williams University, setting fire to the building, and of course, everyone from coast to coast was shocked. This was supposed to happen in the United States, not in Canada. The good. Well, the West Indians had just started to come to Canada in significant numbers, and they were angry at the students for abusing Canada's hospitality and making life harder for everyone. Younger Canadians in universities and high schools, they saw the students as heroes who stood up to racism. A young Peter Marcelin told everyone who wanted to listen that they don't mess with us. We would burn down Toronto and Montreal if they attacked us or trampled on our rights. I supported the students, but for a different reason. The students did not rampage or riot or cause property destruction, as the headline said. They were mature, responsible individuals who responded to an instance of racism in a dignified and reserved manner. And I hope in my presentation that is proven. The whole thing started months before. Sir George Williams, which has now amalgamated with Loyola College to form Concordia University, was one of two destinations for West Indians who came to Canada to study. The other was McGill, where the requirements to enter were more stringent. In Sir George Williams, there was a fourth-year course, Physiology 451, which was taught by a Professor Perry Anderson. It was a necessary course if you wanted to go into med school. The problem for West Indians was that they just couldn't pass the course. Even when West Indian students and Canadians submitted identical papers, the Canadian student would get an A, the West Indian would be lucky to get a C. So the West Indian student body decided to document cases of racism, put it in a report, and take it to the administration, request that if racism was proven, the professor be fired. They took it to Dean Madras, and Dean Madras was in a dilemma because he was an East Indian in a Canadian university. But he figured that it was near the end of the term, and therefore, with the long holidays succeeding, it would be forgotten by the September for the new term. However, during the summer, there were two important conferences in Montreal. One was a Black Writers Conference, which, in addition to the top West Indian writers and aspiring writers, attracted people like Stokely Carmichael, the Black Power advocate in the States, Michael X, the Black Power advocate in England. There was a second conference which was designed to address the problems faced by black people in Canada. So the upshot was that it wasn't forgotten. And in September, the students came back to the Madras office and asked, what is the state of the report? Madras said, unfortunately, the report was lost in the internal mail. So George Williams is one building, so it meant it was lost between one floor and the other. No problem. The students had another report. Here it is. Take it to Madras. But then, sensing a runaround, they also went to the Students' Administrative Council. Now, in most Canadian universities at the time, student bodies tended to be left of center. Even more so in Sir George Williams, where most of them professed themselves to be Marxist-Leninists. So a report on racism was music to their ears. And it was published in the Georgian. Now, the university administration didn't seem to regard the report as very important. They met with the faculty association, which represented teachers, and they decided that, Perry Anderson was not a racist. In fact, the association said that he was an exemplary person who bent over backwards to help West Indians. In addition, at this time, with the report in the student newspaper, it meant everyone was talking about Professor Anderson and racism and so on. On one occasion, Professor Anderson missed his class, and instead, the vice president, Professor O'Brien, came to the class and read a letter saying that Professor Anderson has not been suspended by the university, nor is he ill. The reason for his absence is because of the risk of violence by West Indian students. Risk of violence. Whoa. There were no West Indian students in the class, but the Canadians ran to the cafeteria and let them know what was said. As a result, 3 West Indian students went to Professor O'Brien's office and they asked about the letter. Professor O'Brien admitted that he read the letter, but there was nothing but violence. Oh, you guys are beautiful, nice people. And as he said that, one of the students got up from his chair, went around him, and went to his files, and there was the letter. His attitude changed completely. You guys come barging into this office, attacking me, insulting me, and so on, and dealing with my property? The students took the letter to this administrative council, and it was published in the Georgian with risk of violence highlighted. Students later learned that they were going to be charged criminally with kidnapping, extortion, and theft. So it was in this setting that they realized that nothing was going to be done, and with the demand that there is an independent outside inquiry into the circumstances, the sitting started. West Indian students occupied the 9th floor where there were the computers. Sympathetic Canadian students occupied the 6th floor where there was the cafeteria. They, in looking for people for the independent, one obvious person was the Federal Minister of Justice. His name was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. The students knew Trudeau very well. He had attended many of their parties, but Trudeau, while sympathetic, he stated that university education is a provincial matter, so as a federal politician, he couldn't intervene. One of the other student leaders, Roosevelt Douglas, was very prominent as the leader of the Young Conservatives in Montreal. The federal conservatives, the Young Conservatives, was led by Joe Clark, then a student. He went to Diefenbaker. Diefenbaker heard racism and wanted no part of it. Anyway, it seemed by February 11th that progress was being made. The lawyers on both sides had agreed on a composition for the inquiry that intended to happen. And the sit-in, which at one time had over 400 people in the university, had dwindled. People figured it was the end. The students swept out the room. They didn't want anybody to say, well, they made a mess and so on, wiped down the computer floor and so on. And it was an end. Most people left. There were less than 100 people there at the time. And then suddenly two things happened. One, the university sent a message that they should get out of the computer room and stop disrupting the university activities. There would be no inquiry. And in fact, they would not even speak to the students. The students would deal with the faculty association after that, who had supported the teacher. The second thing that happened that they didn't know was that at the rear of the building, there's an elevator that went down to the underground parking. And a whole detachment of police in full riot gear had come up and were on the university on a higher floor than the Western students. So if the Canadian students on the 6th floor had thrown all the chairs and tables from the cafeteria to block the stairways, the police were inside the building. So suddenly, they saw a whole detachment of riot police in the 9th floor. The students locked the door of the computer room. The riot police smashed the glass at the top of the door. A student turned a water hose on them, but they got in nevertheless. And outside of the university, on the streets below, a crowd had gathered. What they saw were thousands of computer cards and chips floating out of the window, just like confetti at a sports parade. They also saw a fire coming out of the windows in the room, at which time the crowd below started to shout, "Let the niggers burn." So the history would want you to believe that the students who were taking great care of the computers and everything when they were alone, suddenly, when they are in a room, outnumbered by riot police, they would smash computers and do these things. The arrest and trial of the students kept the matter in the news for a longer period. 97 students were arrested, 47 West Indians. There were some prominent West Indians, including Chetty Jagan Jr., the son of the first Prime Minister of Guyana, Chetty Jagan, whose wife, Janet, formerly Janet Rosenberg, was connected to the family of the people who were executed in the States for selling secrets of the atomic bomb to Russia. But his mother nevertheless became president of Guyana in 1997. There was also a Haitian student that was in all the news broadcasts because they said he had a voodoo doll, which was an effigy of the judge who was going to preside the case, and he was sticking pins into it. The students were tried in batches, depending on their country of origin. That is to say, the Trinidadian students were tried as one batch, Barbadian, Jamaican, and whatever. When the Trinidad students were being tried, in Trinidad, it was a matter of grave concern. The news of Sir George Williams was all over the West Indian newspapers, and the students of the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, they took up the cause with a vengeance. The Canadian Governor General went to Trinidad to visit the university, and he was physically barred from entering the university. Then the students led demonstrations that included thousands and thousands of Trinidadians to the Canadian banks and businesses, to the Canadian embassy. And the Canadian banks in particular were institutions that did not hire any black or East Indian above the position of security guard or cleaners. And the reason that they stated publicly was that the public would not have confidence in their deposits if they saw black people as tellers and handling their money. That changed after this series. On the day of the trial, the Canadian banks were closed, the embassy was heavily guarded, and any Canadian in Trinidad was stayed indoors in the hotel rooms or whatever. Now, I read in the papers during Harper's regime that way in the past, in 1972, Prime Minister Trudeau had interfered with the cause of justice by contacting the judge with the trial for the Trinidadians the day before. And what seems to have happened was that the Prime Minister of Trinidad, Eric Williams, had telephoned Trudeau and said that I cannot guarantee the safety of any Canadian in Trinidad if these students are in prison. As a result, the students were found not guilty of every charge except staging an illegal demonstration. And for that they were fined, and the Trinidad government immediately said they would pay all fines and costs. 2 students received jail terms as a result of this ruckus. One was Roosevelt Douglas from Dominica. He was sentenced to 18 months, after which he eventually came to Toronto. In Toronto, at the time, which was a mishmash of political activity, underground political activity, with women's liberation, black liberation, communist groups, social groups, committees to end the war in Vietnam, Roosevelt Douglas fitted into this community. Shortly after he came, a black gentleman came from the United States into Toronto and appointed himself as Rosie Douglas' bodyguard. He was a Black Panther. He had engaged in activity in the state, violent activity in the state, and also shootouts with police. And he was driving a large Cadillac car, air-conditioned and very expensive. Shortly after, I went to London to take a position at the University of Western Toronto. And I heard that Rosie Douglas had been deported from Canada in handcuffs and leg irons back to his native Dominica. In Dominica, he entered politics, he was a member of the opposition, and then he became the Prime Minister of Dominica. He even, in 2000, made a visit to Canada, and when he came back, he died.
And there's water behind there
Yeah,
for you.
okay. In 1998, I was with Local 79, and in the office I saw a Sun paper. I opened it, and in the center of it there was a 2-page article, and I saw this same gentleman, Black Panther, leaning on the car in the middle of it. Apparently, he wanted to emigrate to Canada, and the immigration blocked him on the basis of his criminal record. He was upset, and so he complained to the Sun. It seems that he was never a Black Panther. He has never engaged in any criminal activity. The car he was driving was loaned to him by the RCMP and equipped with strong recording devices, in which they intended to spy on Rosie Douglas and also the underground activity in the States. So I still told myself, thank God, David Kidd was just a little kid in high school at the time. The other student who was given jail time was a Barbadian female named Ann Cools. Ann Cools later got a pardon, so she didn't serve any time. She came to Toronto, went to the School of Social Work at the University of Toronto, got a degree, and then opened a home for battered women. For her community service, she was awarded a lifetime position in the Senate. She became the first black woman ever to sit in Canada's Senate. Now, Ann Cools was no Julie Crow. And my impression is that Trudeau, because he was remorseful at his inaction in the whole, decided to pay back the community in this way. In fact, Ann Cools' major preoccupation when she got to the Senate was not battered women, but men who were abused by women. For instance, men who faithfully pay their child support but are prevented by their spouses from contacting their children, as well as men who were falsely accused of spousal abuse. Now, the main thing to remember here is that Ann Cools and Rosie Douglas, neither of them were present at Sir George Williams when the destruction took place. In fact, Ann Cools didn't even go to Sir George Williams, she went to McGill. And Rosie Douglas himself was a teaching assistant to George Williams. They were punished because they were leaders of the whole insurrection, and no one was found guilty of destroying property or doing the things that history says that they do. The Sir George Williams affair was very important to West Indians in Toronto, in that in the 1970s and 80s, West Indians received a greater degree of respect from Canadian society than immigrants from African or Asian countries. And the parallel I would draw in closing is from England. After the Second World War, many West Indians flocked to England. And they were accorded a higher degree of respect from English society than immigrants from African and Asian countries. Why? Illustration. They all felt a huge debt of gratitude to the so-called uncultured Jamaican in this society, for the reason that they got disrespect from society. Illustration. An Englishman meets the Jamaican in London and says, excuse me, sir, can you tell me the way to Euston Square? The Jamaican looks at him and knocks him down with a solid right-handed punch and says, I'm catching my ass in this society. You born here and asking me for instructions? Black history. Thank you.